Hello everyone, my name is Cassidy Hanner and this is my mini presentation 3. So in mini presentation 2, my cohort F talked about prosthesis and illness, and I did a lot of the research on illness in that presentation, and this became of real interest to me along with the dichotomy between the medical and social model and how that affects people with disabilities. So the kind of theme or thesis that all of my sources are based on is although illness and disability are related and can have a great impact on one another, they are exclusive to one another. I really want to go into a medical related field, and so I feel like research and having knowledge on the topic of illness and disability will really help me to be a better ally in my future profession. So my first blog that I'm going to talk about is called Chronically Jenny. And Jenny is 24 years old and she lives with a multitude of chronic illnesses, and she's the one writing this blog. She provides life advice to others going through the same experience, and she's an advocate for those with invisible disabilities. And often, if one's illness is a cause of their disability, it can be invisible, which can cause further maltreatment when people don't believe them. Or I know this could be a common situation if you see someone getting out of a car with a handicap sticker and you think, well, why did they have to have that handicap sticker? So it comes with an extra stigma. And she really helps normalize this life that's not necessarily normal. In her blog, she has fun posts with relationship advice, as well as advice about living with her disability and how she manages her pain that comes with her chronic illness. My second blog, it's called Carrie Ann Lightly, which is the name of the author. Carrie Ann has cerebral palsy, and she uses a wheelchair because of this. But she also loves to travel, and her blog is a travel blog about accessible travel, which I think is super cool because travel is something I really love, and I think it's something that everyone should have the opportunity to do if that's something they would like to do. Lightly is a really relatable resource to those who may have goals to travel but may not necessarily think travel is possible for them. She shows how she does it and how she's managed to do it, and by sharing her story with others, she makes it a reality for them. She's also an example that she is more than her illness and she's more than her disability, especially since her illness caused her disability. And because of this, she has established an identity outside of that as a travel blogger and someone who loves to travel. She also proves that society is only making it more difficult to do the things that she loves because of the lack of accessibility. So just because of her illness or because of her disability, travel shouldn't be a big deal, but because it's not accessible, there are many extra hoops that she has to jump through, and through her blog, she shares how she's done that and how others can do so as well. So the peer review article I chose, it was published in Disability Studies Quarterly, and it's called Next to Normal and the Persistence of Pathology and Performances of Psychosocial Disability. And so this is an article that critically reviews the performance, artist commentary, and audience reactions, arguing that mental illness has failed, the stigma of mental illness has failed to be removed from the musical Next to Normal, which is a musical that addresses the stigma of mental illness, but it's portrayed using the medical model. And this article argues that not every attempt at removing stigma is a good attempt, although it may be in good spirit. They describe that sympathy was better achieved rather than removing stigma, since only one aspect or side of mental illness is portrayed through the medical model. And as someone who identifies as having a mental illness or mental disability, I don't want sympathy. That's not something I look for, and giving someone sympathy doesn't remove the stigma or doesn't normalize mental illness and mental disability in our society. The musical also shows the harms of the medical model, especially on people with mental illness, but that's only part of the story, is the harms of the medical model. Again, it didn't really break down stigma. Now, I definitely recommend checking out this article if you're interested in how portrayal of disability and mental illness occurs in different art forms, especially musicals. I think a really big problem that wasn't necessarily mentioned in the article with this performance and with this musical is that it wasn't written or performed by anyone with a mental illness. It really wasn't well informed, and I think that could be a big downfall, which again is something I'm really interested in, is having these accurate portrayals of what disability looks like to people who actually live with a disability. The film I chose is called Brain on Fire, and it's a Netflix original featuring Chloe Grace Moretz, Carrie-Anne Moss, and Tyler Perry. It's the story of an up-and-coming journalist whose behavior starts to change as she moves into a state of insanity. And it shows the hardships of trying to understand what is happening to you when the world around you tells you, oh, you're the problem, you're not good enough, you're making life harder for yourself, like why would you say these things? When the problem isn't necessarily you, it's the people who you're treating with. She's in and out of the hospital with little diagnosis or explanation until she meets a doctor whose intervention allows her to regain her life. And I liked this movie. I thought it was entertaining, but I don't think it's, again, a super accurate portrayal of what being with a disability could be like, again, because it wasn't written or performed by anyone with this disability, although I think it can show what it might look like for someone who's trying to receive a diagnosis, who's trying to figure out what's wrong, who's trying to figure out why they're disabled within our society. And the video I chose on YouTube is called Natasha Talks About the Social Model of Disability. And it's only a 2-minute long video, but I feel like it gives a pretty good overview through the eyes of Natasha, who is a woman with a hearing impairment and disability, of what the social model looks like and why it's such a big impact on her life, and how it's changed her life. Versus viewing her disability through the medical model. So to her, the social model makes the world more accessible and friendly as she lives with a hearing impairment. And one of the comments that she makes in the movie is that, no, like the world can't fix her hearing impairment, but they can do things to make her life easier and to make the world around her more accessible. And so if you want a perspective of someone with a disability about the social model and why that should be the model we use to perceive disability, I think this video is really awesome, especially since it's really short. And the social media account that I chose is called Annie Laney, and it's an Instagram account. Annie, the person who runs the account, is queer, disabled, and a Latinx activist and content creator. So she has a lot of really cool intersections that inform her opinion and give her a really unique view of the world. And I love that her account is super accessible. She has an image description under every picture, and if she posts a video, it has closed captioning. She lives with a chronic illness and provides support to those going through a similar or the same experience as her. But she also shares how crippling her experiences with doctors have been and will be, and how people will try to box her into her illness being her disability, even though that's not quite the relationship that they have. And one of her more recent posts that I really enjoyed reading was about the economic privilege of receiving a diagnosis. A diagnosis of an illness can only be achieved by having the money and having the resources and access to a doctor and healthcare, and that's a privilege not everyone is afforded. And I've never thought about that in some light, and I think that further demonstrates how disability is so separate from illness, because you can be disabled within our society, you can be unable to access things the rest of the world can access without having the illness or diagnosis to go with it. So I want to thank you all for listening, and I really hope you learned something and that you'll check out some of these resources that I found. I think some of them are really helpful, and some of them can really help you establish a critical eye towards disability studies, the medical model, and illness. Thanks.